Hi, good evening. This is Motzai Purim, I guess. So I guess the beginning of Shushan Purim. And now that I feel a little bit better, I want to share with you something I put together about Purim, which I delivered today at my Mesiba. But there was a little more raucous and there were more questions and get hopped up and so forth. This will be a straightforward business for what it's worth. And I do it every year. And here we go. So I'm going to read you my notes. This year, I think, I will play a little devil's advocate from previous years. As we know, when it comes to the Megillah, there's a lot of unclarity. Therefore, there are a lot of differing and conflicting views regarding the facts of the story and of the characters. For example, was Esther young or old? I mean, some opinions in Chazal say she was 80 years old. That can't be literally true. Maybe she had the wisdom of an 80-year-old. The fact she wasn't a chatterbox indicates that she wasn't some usual flighty, dumb, blonde, pretty girl, something like that. But not that she was 80 years old. Another question relates to whether she was the wife of Mordechai. As we all know, Rabbi Meir in the Gemara asserts this. And there are a number of Agadatas elsewhere in the Gemara, Megillah, such as the one that says that she was sleeping with both Mordechai and the king. Although you should know the Binyan Siyam, by the way, in 137, says that she didn't sleep with Mordechai prior to the downfall of Haman. So many years went by. She was just with Ahasuerus. Although that's, I don't think it's a Pashtum shot the way we usually learn it, but it's an interesting Binyan Siyam. Anyway, but she was sleeping with both Mordechai and the king, but she was going to the mikveh in the middle, as the Tosa says, and practicing birth control, mishameshes b'moch. So that indicates that she was married to both. And also the one that says, kasher avadati, kasher obad mimcha, kach kshem shavadati mibeis abba, kach obad mimcha. That, once I go barotzen to the melech, you know how it goes. Like the Gemara says, shaloka das hoy, shabucho yom b'yom arachshav, ba'onis, achshav barotzen. Kshem shavadati mibeis abba, kach obad mimcha. We all know that. On the other hand, this description that she was married to Mordechai doesn't really fit the story. Because Esther was taken as one of the Basulos. They didn't take married women, so why would they take Mordechai's wife? Remember, this was 7 years, or maybe 5 years, whatever, before the whole rise of Haman, the whole situation with Haman. Now, you can answer, I have in the past, by saying they grabbed any pretty girl, whether she was a Basul or not. The Gemara said the king was so plastered, he couldn't tell the difference. But this sounds dochik, doesn't it? I mean, the Gemara is very cynical about this. It's a vayeva melch. It says there mikol hanoshim batisochem bechesed mikol abisulos amarav bikish litom tam basula tam beula tam. All right, but the pashut shot is that the king liked her more than all the other women, basulos or not basulos, in his harem. Not that Esther was anatomically unique. And I was happy to discover that the Ravid in Sanhedrin, who says the same thing in stronger terms. The Ravid says, this whole business, he's talking about the Balamorna, that Mordechai married her, Hevel Huzeh, the Otu Beulos Heviel Achashverosh. So the Ravid says it. How can you say that he was married to Mordechai if it says they only took Basulas? Let's think about this for a minute. If the king's agents grabbed married women, then he thereby would have triggered an ocean of resentment and hatred, no? I mean, going around the empire just taking people's wives in the Middle East. He would instantly have caused himself unnecessary political problems. Now, Ahasuerus does not come across as a political blockhead. You see from the Gemara that he had basic political common sense. He had 7 advisors whom he steadily consulted. And don't think that's an unimportant detail in the story. It was not unimportant to Chazal. The Gemara Megillah Chav Gimel says that is where we get Shiva Aliyas B'Kriyas HaTorah. Why Shiva? It's for, at least the way Rashi learns anyway. It's for the 7 advisors of Ahasuerus. So Ahasuerus was no political dummy. Moreover, Ahasuerus demonstrated that he had that he understood the first rule of politics, which is reward your friends and punish your enemies, by parading Mordecai throughout the streets in royal garb, royal apparel, even after he had agreed to Haman's plan to kill Mordecai and everybody a year from now. So you see, the basic idea that he saved my life, I have to do something for him, this quid pro quo business, was pretty straightforward there. I mean, the Gemara has a whole soliloquy of the king, which demonstrates his basic political acumen. You remember this? How come he couldn't sleep? Why, Nofel Milsa B'daita, he started thinking, how come Esther invited Haman and nobody else to the party? Dilma Esika Shakal B'deo Gavra? Are Esther and Haman plotting against me? But if that's so, Lohava Gavra Racham Alem daily, then why didn't anybody inform me of this plot of Esther and Haman? Is it possible that I failed to reward people who did me good things, and therefore there's no incentive for them to go and be loyal to me? And then that's why I brought out Sefer Zichronos Divrei. I remember we talked about Mordecai saving his life from Big Maseresh. Point is, he understood basic politics, political survival skills, right? So if he carried off married women, why would he wonder who his enemy could be? There were thousands of outraged husbands. LMI, it doesn't sound like that. On the other hand, you could retort that there are indeed two opposing views in Chazal as to whether Ahasuerus was a Chacham or a Tipesh. So I guess you could argue that the Man Domer who holds that Esther was a married woman, holds that the Melech was a Tipesh. There is such an opinion in the Gemara. Whereas the one who says that Esther was not the wife of Mordecai holds that he was a Melech Chacham, a Pekeach, exactly. And anyway, why didn't Mordecai tell the king that Esther was his wife? This is 5 years before Haman showed up. And prevent her from being taken. Wasn't Mordecai a member of the royal court? Wasn't he a general in the Persian army? Moreover, how could it not be known that Esther was his wife? So much so that her unknown Jewish identity was a crucial factor in the story. Right? That's the whole point, that nobody suspected her. Really? She was married to Mordecai and it never got out? Now, we do have an Agadic Masorah that Esther was married to Mordecai. You remember, Meir says it. But that just means the Rameir is transmitting one of a number of versions of the story that were handed down by Chazal. It's not the only Masorah, it's one of them. So you can't disregard it with contempt. But on the other hand, you're not forced to explain the story in only that way. For that reason, a number of Rishonim hold that Esther was not married to Mordecai. They assert this not because of my reasons, because it seems far-fetched, but for Lomdisha considerations. For example, the Baal Hamor answers the famous question of Tosas and Rishonim in Sanhedrin, where it says, wasn't Esther a case of Bepharhesia? And they have to answer Kargolam, Hanos Asmon. It's Ayin Dalet in Sanhedrin. I'm sure many of you know this. So, again, they asked the question, wasn't Esther a case of Bepharhesia? So Tosas and all the Rishonim say like this, why are you asking that Esther was a case of Bepharhesia? Wasn't Esther a case of straightforward Gil Arayas? Right? Ask a bigger kasha. To give whatever answers they do. The Baal Hamor says, it wasn't a case of Arayas. Meaning, she was not married. That's what he says. Okay? I don't hold from that Agadatar. That's what the Baal Hamor says. That whole drasha, that she was a Eshes married to Mordecai, is it's not so clear, right? So Gemara didn't want to ask him something that's not clear. It's one of many versions. Lav Dafka, she was married to Mordecai. Okay? So, that's the Baal Hamor. In general, the Baal Hamor goes on in his personal interpretation of the Gemara in Sanhedrin 9 Dalet to derive from the whole Shachal Bataria that Gil Arayis is unique among the big three, Gil Rash Shvikadam Avodazar, and that a female does not have to do Yehar Bal Yavar if either was a Baal Hamor now, if either was a case of Karka Ola or was a case of Hanos Atzma, which of course the case of Esther was a case of Hanos Atzma. The king didn't do it because of religious reasons. The hetero Hanos Atzma would not apply to Shvichas Dam Avodazar, although there is a Shultas that says it does. Only Karka Olam would work by all three. So Esther was not required to sacrifice her life in resisting the king, since he was doing Hanos Atzma. The Ramban and the Melchomas Hashem and other Rishonim sharply disagree, and they say only Karka Olam works, not Hanos Atzma. Now understand, all agree that Esther was Karka Olam. The question is, was she Karka Olam as an answer to the question of Gil Arayis, or was she Karka Olam because answer the question for Hesya, but in point of the actual fact, they say yes, that it was a case of Karka Olam, that she was passive. So let's go with a non-married Esther being taken to the king. The whole situation, of course, is a case of onus, of force. That's why she ate bacon. Remember, the Gemara says, Katla de Chaziri. Rashi said bacon. Pork chops. Right? On the other hand, she could have told him that she's Jewish, and she could have gotten kosher food. It's only because she kept her identification secret at the orders of Mordechai that she had to eat treif. And she ate treif for 7 years. Isn't that strange? I mean, is that really a case of Yavar al Yahari? For 7 years? Also, don't we believe that treif food is matam to misalev? Correct? It messes up your judgment. Didn't she need to have good judgment all the time that she was trying to survive in her delicate situation? Right? You know, it reminds me of the famous story of Kleisenberger Rebbe in the camps. He was in the concentration camp for a year. And he told, this is what they say, and he told all the others that Hasidim would ask him questions. You can eat treif. Obviously, you can eat treif in concentration camp when you're starving to death. But he did not. I think he had raw potatoes or something like that. I don't know how he survived. And they asked him, why are you doing like this? Al Bidin is mutter, which it was. And he said, it is mutter, but I'm afraid of timtum alev, which means it'll cloud my judgment. And in surviving concentration camp, you need split-second judgment in a lot of cases. Let's say, for example, the Germans say, let's all go out for a work detail. Do they mean it for work detail, or they're going to shoot everybody? You understand? And there are a number of stories with him, actually with my father as well, that they're both in Dachau, that you have to make a split-second decision and make the right decision, otherwise it could cost your life. So he said he didn't want his judgment clouded. That's the idea. Yes, it is mutter, 100%. He trade in the case of Sakonis Nefashis, no question about that. But there will be Timtum Alev. Okay? I suppose that's the meaning where it says, Ein Esther Magedes Moladatovi, yes, Amom. Kasher Tzibola Mordechai, Ves Mahamar Mordechai, Esther Usa Kasher Isobam Nerito. That Esther totally followed the directions for 5 years of Mordechai. Why did she obey Mordechai? And she hid her identity. And she had to eat treif because she figured like this. I'm now in a situation where I have to eat treif. That's going to cloud my judgment. If I make the wrong move in the palace, that'll be curtains for me. Therefore, she had to totally rely on the judgment of Mordechai, who ain't only kosher, who made it his business to always hang around the court. Right? Mordechai Yosef B'Shar HaMelech, you know that. So in other words, Mordechai said like this, I have the judgment. You unfortunately have to eat pork chops. So your judgment might be clouded. And Esther knew this, so she said, you tell me what to do. Anyway, here's Esther and her 7 Naros, 7 BJJ girls. That's what it pours down to. Eating treif all these years because she has to hide her identity. I think this is why no one suspected her of being Jewish. I mean, the king and Haman knew she's eating chazer, so she can't be Jewish. So the bacon was an integral part of the strategy, which is interesting. This may be why Mordechai later suspected her incorrectly of seeking to hide in the palace to escape the expected massacre of the Jews. Al Tadam, Ibn Ashekli, Himoli Beis HaMelech, Mikol Hanashim, Mikol Yehudim. Now, what is that? In other words, Mordechai was saying like this. Now, he was wrong, but he suspected, he said, maybe the fact you're eating treif for 5-7 years now is messing you up, and you think you could hide from the fate of the Jews by just adopting a low profile. Right? Now, that's not true. She did give up, she was ready to risk her life. But this is why Mordechai thought so. Because he said like this, Nebuch, because of Ernest's situation, she's eating ham all the time and stuff like that. She has no choice, and that's messing up the way she thinks. Okay? Also, this might be why Esther invites the Haman and the king to a mishteh, where instead of a suda, in a suda you have treif food. In mishteh you only have wine, stuff like that. It's not yain nesech mamish. Who knows if there was even stam yanim at that time. So it makes sense that she's more into wine. By the way, there's a good word from Jonas and Evshitz, but I'll skip that. By the way, this also fits with an interesting gra, Vilna Gaon. We all know that Esther is described as ugly and not pretty. She just had a chutshel chesem atuchalel, like pixie dust. She's described as the Iraq Rokes, green. In other words, a yuch. But the Gra says, why do you say that? The Megillah says, Hanaira Yafas Torah Tovat's Mara. She was beautiful. That's why she won the contest. What kind of a word is this Iraq Rokes description? Like, where'd you get that from? And I mean from the word Hadassah, but still, it doesn't fit the story. That's the Gra. And it's a good question. And the Gra answers with something I consider profound, and that is, she started out beautiful, but the palace life, with the king's constant bothering her, and the daily pork meals, depressed her and ruined her looks. In other words, she started out a Yafas Tova Maria, but the king, but she ended up over the time as the Iraq Rokes. It's kind of like a real depression, which is completely understandable from a firm perspective. But the king was still into her because she had divinely bestowed charm, chut shel chesed matuch aleha. It's very interesting. See, Iraq Rokes is not what you think it means. It's not a put down. It's actually a reflection of the terrible strain she was under for so many years. It's hard to live a life of Esther, right? If you think about it mystically, Esther's suffering, which is the Iraq Rokes, over the food she ate at the palace, was a tikkun for the great sin of the Jewish people, as the Talmidim said to Shimon ben Yochai. You remember that colloquy that they had? What was the big sin? The students of Rashbi said, right? In other words, the great sin which almost got him killed was not the eating at the king's party. At the party, either the food was kosher, if you go with the hot idea that Lasos Kirtzon Ish means Mordecai and Esther, so Mordecai was in charge of making sure that they got kosher food, or they had to eat because of onus, right? And they could go because it wasn't a religious occasion. It was Hanas Atzmon. Ahasuerus is basically a Gilgal of Donald Trump, you understand? So in other words, he was showing a party. Why? The Haros Army, how's it go? It's Yikar Tiferes Gudula, so, the Haros Army by Yomim. How's it go at the beginning of the Megillah? You know what I mean? Haroso, it's Osher Kva Malchuso, Yikar Tiferes Gudula, so that's Trump Towers. He wouldn't show how gavaldic he was. Wasn't religious. It was an ego thing, okay? So in other words, they could go to the meal, right? The only thing is, they didn't have to enjoy it. The enjoyment was the big sin. Esther is the reverse. She's by contrast. What's the story with her? She has the best palace food for years and hated every moment of it. And it made her sick and ruined her looks. So she's Misakenis, the sin of Klal Yisrael. She was the savior. That's if you go with the students of Rashbi who say the sin was Nehenu Misudasa Shalosa Russia. If you go to the Rashbi himself, as you know, he says that they bowed down to the idol back in the time of Nebuchadnezzar. If you go that way, then the person who was a Masak in that particular sin was Mordecai, who refused to bow down to Haman, despite the severe criticism of the Chacham. The Gemara says the Klal Yisrael Tainus on Mordecai. How's it go? He what's the right word? Provoked Haman. Okay? So the debate between Rashbi and the students is actually a debate, if you think about it. Who is the real hero of Purim, Esther or Mordecai? Bottom line, Iraq Rokes is a compliment, not a diss. Here was Esther, the queen of Persia, being treated royally, getting the best food and accommodations, hating every moment of it, because she was a Beis Yaakov girl. Now, if you think about it in Lumdisha terms, I think, the difference between Esther and Klal Yisrael can be defined in the following terms. Is Yahar Val Yavar or Yavar Val Yahar? Is Yahar Val Yavar a Hutra or a Dechuya? Meaning, think about it. Onus per se, in other words, forcing people to do something to change their religion, was new to the Jewish experience. As far as I can think, you do not find in the Chumash or the Navi that Jews were forced in the Bais Rishon period or the Shoftim or any of that stuff to bow down to idols against their will, to change their religion. The first, right? I mean, it is a sad fact that Klal Yisrael, did a lot of voluntary avodah zarah by his recent period, but that's on their own. Nobody came to foreign king that I can think of and forced them to do it. The first recorded case of onus I can think of are three: the statue of Nebuchadnezzar, the bowing, the party of Ahasuerus, and the bowing to Haman. No, isn't that true? My point is, the entire Metzias of Yeharg Yavar Yavar was never a Shiloh Lamaisa. It was never a practical question until the Babylonian Persian era, until the time of Purim, more or less. So do not be surprised if there were differing attitudes towards it. It's not crazy to think that if you find yourself in a situation of onus, and therefore in a situation of Yavar Val Yaharig, no, it's not the big three, that you say it's Hotra. It's 100% okay to eat trade food without any guilt feelings. It's okay to be Nanim Sudas to Russia. I mean, the people in concentration camp, like I said before, who found that the guy said, I guess, I didn't ask to be in Auschwitz. I did not ask to be in Dachau. And now they're starving us to death, all the rest of it. I eat what I have to eat. I mean, I'm not guilty about it. You understand? I'm not guilty about it. I mean, this is the situation I was put in. You get what I'm saying? So don't be surprised if somebody feels it's 100% okay in that situation, eat trade food, that it's okay to be Nanamizudas to Russia. After all, doesn't the Rambam say, very famously, that when the din is Yavar Val Yaharig, if you choose to do Yaharig Val Yavar, then you're chayav. You're doing a sin. Now, the other Rishonim don't agree, but I'm just saying, you can totally hear that such an idea was around at that time, and it's logical to a certain degree, okay? Doesn't that seem to imply that when you have a case of Yavar Val Yaharig, you're doing nothing wrong at all, and it's just fine? So it's not surprising that if they said, listen, we have to go to the meal of Ahasuerus, gotta go. Don't be surprised they say this. Once we're here, might as well enjoy ourselves. Not a big sin, you'd think, okay? Same thing for bowing down. I mean, think about this. Nebuchadnezzar with the statue, Haman with himself in the statue. Were they really engaged in a shmad, in a campaign to convert the Jews to paganism? Doesn't seem so. Nebuchadnezzar did not launch his campaign against Judaism. I mean, his highest officials were Orthodox Jews. Daniel Chanem Mashal Zai, according to the Torah, right? I mean, we know that. And if you want to get technical, it's not a Shas Shmat, the Rishonim say, unless it's directed specifically against the Jews. If it's everybody has to bow down, it's not only for the Jews, it's not called a Shas Shmat, for the purpose of Yeharg Bal Yavar. He set up an idol, Nebuchadnezzar did, in the Dur Valley. It was an ego thing. If you check out the sheet, I looked it up. Rabbeinu Tam, the Barbano, Ashach, and the Malbin. In art school, Donnie will have all this, right? There are many sheets that say it was just a COVID thing, right? So it's Hanon Satzman. Why can't you buy down? Same thing with Haman. I mean, think about this. I know the story. Did Haman really claim divinity? Wasn't it a Donald Trump thing? Truth is, there are different opinions on this in the Gemara. One opinion is that he was a Nevad, a deity. But what does that mean? I mean, it's weird. King Ahasuerus was not a deity. He was a Zoroastrian, actually. No one worshipped Ahasuerus. But you're telling me he said, my prime minister is a god? That's what it means to bow down to him? And the king commanded everyone to worship him as a god? That's how you learn that the king said bow down to everybody? It doesn't make sense, right? At least, I don't think it makes sense. And I see the Marshal over there says, that they bring down Hanani, Mishael, Azariah at the time of Nebuchadnezzar, because they're the only ones who didn't bow down. But all the others, all the rabbis, all the Sanhedrin bowed down. Why did they bring down the case of Haman? Because Mordechai didn't bow down, but everybody else did. Marshal is asking. The Mashal Mordechai lo. You could argue with that and say Mordechai was the only Jew there, but let's go with the Marshal. And he says, the Haman lo aso Eloah. Haman never made himself a god. El Shamel Tzibul Shtachmi Yakovit. The king said, bow to him as a matter of honor, prestige. He's my prime minister and so forth. So even the Marshal over there is not going with the idea that Haman is literally a god. And there's another opinion, as you all know, that he wore an idol on his breast. So then he's not the god, the idol is. You see? So you bow down, you're bowing to the idol. In other words, according to the opinion, Haman was not a god. Did not claim to be. The royal command to bow down to him. I mean, that shot that he wore an idol on his breast is goofa because it's pretty clear he wasn't declaring himself a god. The royal command to bow down to him was just a sign of great honor bestowed on Haman by the king. The reason Mordecai did not bow down was the idol on his breast, not because Haman claimed divine powers. Moreover, Haman was not really seen outside the royal compound, outside of Shushan Abira. He was not in Shushan. You know, there was a Shushan, and then around it was a moat, and then it was Shushan. I mean, Shushan Abira, the royal quarters, and then a moat around it, then the city of Shushan. As many explain, Mordecai was the only Jew in Shushan Abira. When it says Ish Yehudi Ayab Shushan Abira, the matter says Ish Yechidi, right? So he was the only Jew in Shushan Abira. He's the only guy to actually encounter Haman. Of course, if that's true, there wasn't even a Hasia factor, because for Hasia you need 10 other Jews, and there weren't. I mean, the whole thing happened in a very short time span, a couple of days. So the refusal to bow was not the same thing as Esther sleeping with the king, which the Gemara says was a case of Hasia, but of course Esther was there for years and years and years. Of course, it got out. Everybody knew about it. According to many, the Jews were angry at Mordecai for ostentatiously going out of his way to flaunt his non-bowing to Haman, something which led to Haman's move to exterminate Klal Yisrael. The Medrash says, Amru lo, Heviyodea sha'atom ha'pileinu b'charbo. You, Mordecai, by stirring up Haman, are putting us all to death under his sword. Mordecai answered, it's a case of Avodah Zarah. But that doesn't mean that his opponents, Mordecai's opponents, conceded the point. They held he's endangering them for metaphysical reasons to fix the sin of bowing Nebuchadnezzar's idol. I mean, that's a wild, like a metaphysical idea. That's meta-halachic. Well, they too believe, for different reasons, I'm talking about the Sanhedrin, not Mordecai, that it was okay to bow down to Haman for metaphysical and meta-halachic reasons. At least according to the Chassam Sofer. The Chassam Sofer says, Madua tover eis mitzvahs hamelech. Remember that? They said to him every day, Madua eis mitzvahs hamelech. Madua tover eis mitzvahs hamelech. God's decree. What do you mean? Tochachtem, this is Chassam Sofer. Tochachtem hoise shahaman olo dul b'gzeres HaKadosh Baruch Hu malchus olam. The dramatic rise of Haman to supreme power was obviously divine will. The king's command, they should bow down to him. That's how the Sanhedrin, that's how the Gedolei Ador touched up the situation. That's how Chassam Sofer learns it. Like, what are you setting him up for? What are you defying him? Shamas HaChekes and all that. So you see, the dispute among the Jews had to do with whether the Haman situation was the case of Yahar B'al Yavar or Yavar B'al Yahar. The others were not so bothered by the Avodah Zarah aspect, but Mordecai was. I don't know if it's Mordecai's final triumph at the end of the story persuaded his critics that Mordecai had been right. Just because a miracle occurred and the Jews' triumph doesn't prove that the halacha follows Mordecai and not the others, if they're the majority. I mean, isn't that exactly the case of Tanur Shalach Noy? Remember, Eliezer says the sky shall fall and the walls should shake and all those kind of things. And they say, Lo Bashamayim. You know that story. I can understand that the Chacham would not excommunicate Mordecai after the fact. I mean, he never formally raised the question as far as bowing to Haman the way Rav Lezer and Hyrcanus did in the Tanur Shalach Noy. Moreover, Mordecai became the prime minister of Persia. And we know that the policy of Chazal is you don't excommunicate high VIPs. Remember the story of Todos Ish Romi, that he used to offer the Korban Pesach in his house in Rome, a roasted lamb, Kedim Makulis, all the rest of it. And what the Chacham writes from Israel, Sholchale, Iyumoli Todos Ata, Gozan Alecha Nidoy. If not for the fact he was such a big chashuv guy with the Roman government and all the rest of it, a rich and powerful guy, we put you in Cherem. But because you are powerful, we don't. So Mordecai became very powerful. The answer I would give to why Mordecai was not a Zokim Mamre really is this. He did not challenge the ruling that Haman was a case of Yavar B'al Yahar instead of Yahar B'al Yavar. Rather, Mordecai protested their cavalier attitude that since it's okay, it's not a big deal. They did not feel it's such a bad thing. Indeed, as the Chassam Sofer said, it's a good thing. Isn't it the decree of Hamelech? Right? It was the attitude that Mordechai so dramatically and dangerously opposed. If they indeed had to bow, they should have felt guilty and depressed, not comfortable and blasé. By not bowing and provoking a firestorm and a miracle, Mordechai demonstrated that heaven agreed with him. In my opinion, when it says Mordechai, Yotzim Lifnei HaMelech, it's Lifnei HaMelech, right? In splendid apparel, that's a way of saying that Shamayim approved of his attitude. Now this apparently had an effect on the Jewish people, and they changed their attitude. That's what Purim's all about. This would be the meaning of the statement that Mordechai was misakein, the sin of Hishtachol Etzelon. Not that his own individual actions, but he changed the mind and attitude of everybody. They no longer felt ho-hum in situations of Yavar of Al Yahar. Yes, there would be times in the future of Jewish history and Golis that you had to bow down and do things like that. But if you feel bad about it, you may return to full mitzvah observance. If you don't feel bad about it, if you make peace with it, you'll end up like the Spanish conversos in 1492. They became comfortable with sinning and they lost their Jewish identity. There are people in Spain, for example, today, you know and I know, that if you go all the way back, they're Jewish, it doesn't mean anything. They don't consider themselves Jewish at all. It's gone. They're going. Esther, of course, did the same thing with Abigail Rice. Instead of glorying in her new position, in her high position as Queen of Persia, she became a Yarak Rokus. You see? This attitude of Mordechai and Esther, that one feels bad at having to violate Jewish practice, even when such is the law, Yavar Val Yahard. This attitude is a reflection of the feeling that the Torah, the mitzvahs, the laws, is something you want to do and not something you have to do. No? Isn't that right? Because if you felt it's something you have to do, if you have a way out, by Yavar Val Yahard, you do it. What do you call that? You don't call it Kafel Harke Gigas. So what do you call it? Hadar Kiblu B'Me'achashver. That's the meaning, I think, this year. Hadar Kiblu B'Me'achashver. They changed their attitude. The change of the attitude was the big change in the aftermath of Purim. And the effect of the attitude change even overflowed to those who were not Jewish. Notice the pasuk juxtaposition. I never noticed it before. Right? Look at this. Simcha v'sason la'Yehudim mishteh v'yom tov v'rabi me'am aretz misyahadim. Since it was Simcha v'sason la'Yehudim, and the Jews now felt like it's something they want to do, not something they have to do, it overflowed to the going, Rabbi me'am aretz misyahadim. It's juxtaposed. It's like a hegdish. Everything I just said is spiritual. It looks at the Purim story from a Ruchnius point of view. There is another side to the story, a political one which is again nowadays, especially in light of current events. This has to do with the social meaning of Ishtachul Etzelem and Nenu Mesudasa shows to Russia. Why did Jews do these? If you think about it, there were two reasons, two Yetzer Haras. First, it was fear, and which is natural, makes sense. The Jews did not want to antagonize Nebuchadnezzar or Ahasuerus. I get that. Okay? But the second reason was social political. They wanted to integrate into the Babylonian Persian empires. They thought if they do not stand out as nonconformists, if they go along on public occasions with everyone else, then they will be considered full citizens of the empires. Yes, they would have their own religious traditions and practices, so did every other group in the empires. But they're also part of the trans-religious polity, and they demonstrate this on rare occasions when every group drops its peculiarity and joins in a joint celebration, even if that celebration had religious overtones. Is that not exactly what happened to two occasions of Ishtachul Etzelem and Nenu Mesudasa Shel Achashverosh? Isn't that what they were? Look up the chapter in Daniel. Nebuchadnezzar wanted a golden statue, not instead of, but in addition to all the other religions, right? He didn't say you have to drop your religions. He just said, I'm making a grand religion above the others that you should bow down now, at least, to show that you worship this statue. And then you can do all your own religion whenever you want. Okay? So you can be a fully practicing Jew. Just bow down once to the golden statue of Nebuchadnezzar. That way you show you're loyal subjects of Babylonia, and you enjoy all the benefits thereof. Be just like every other group, and that way you can be safe, they felt, and be secure in Golos Baba. Same thing with Ahasuerus' party. It was a trans-ethnic and transnational party. All groups were invited. Ostensibly, it was a secular occasion, not a religious occasion. So what's wrong with that? Indeed, I think this is the question that led Chazal, in my opinion, to do the whole story with Ahasuerus calculating the 70 years and figuring the base of Mishnah could rebuild and wearing the Kalim Shonim and the outfit of the Kohen Gadol, all that sort of thing. In other words, they try to make it a religious thing, okay? But, let's put it in, none of it's in the Gemara. And elsewhere, in the Gemara, the party is described as purely secular politics. He was Mephayes, the faraway provinces, the immediate provinces, okay? The debate whether he was a Melch Tipesh or Pekech is a question of whether he Mephayes them in the right order. But it's political, so what's the problem with attending the party, even having a good time? The answer is, I think, that more than being a sin, it was delusional. The delusion was if the Jews act patriotically, there'll be no real anti-Semitism and they'll be safer. The Purim story demonstrated to them they were wrong. Like it or not, being engulfed means to dwell on the top of a volcano. Hopefully the volcano is dormant, but it can explode any time. Preceded, of course, by rumblings. That's just the way volcanoes are. In the Purim story, although the Jews are in peace, at the beginning we go, it's an illusion. Because the Gemara says, you will perhaps remember this, that when the king sends out his first letter, Liosh Kalish, Sarah Beveso, the Medaber Kilshon Amo, the people, it says, Imali Igros Rishonis, Lonishtar Me Yisrael Klum. If not for the fact the first letter was considered stupid by the people. In the Middle East, you're going to say, Liosh Kalish Sarah Beveso, the man is in charge of the house. It's the Middle East. So he said, what are you, crazy? And that made it, the Gemara says, that later on when he sent the letters to kill the Jews, 12 months from now, they didn't move right away. If they would have thought this was a real letter and not some flighty business by a, what's the right word, inconsistent type of king, they would have killed Jews right then and there. Really? They would kill Jews right then and there? They wouldn't wait 12 months. In other words, their neighbors were only restrained from violence against the Jews by fear of the authorities. On their own, they would turn the Jews apart when they were given the green light. Knowing that, divine providence arranged the death of Vashti in the stupid royal letter long before the Haman decree, so as to restrain from perplexity the natural inclination of the neighbors and the readiness to attack their Jewish neighbors. Right? So, that whole idea is very revealing of a psychological mindset. They're in a volcano, and it could explode at any moment. Right? And if it's not exploding, don't delude yourself that you're not on a volcano. Realizing, as I think some leftist Israelis have come to realize after October 7th, that there was not really any cure for anti-Semitism, that going to royal parties and bowing to royal statues would not cure anti-Semitism and change the existential reality of living on a volcano, that the Jews at the time of Purim saw the stark reality of Ein Lo Lishon El Avishim Hashemayim. And they decided to follow the Mordechai paradigm, especially when events demonstrated that Mordechai, who was considered from me, is the guy who rose to power in the Persian Empire among the non-Jews. He's the one who became prime minister and all-powerful. So you see, his Mahalch was right. One more point. It says, Rashi says, and one is Tefillin, and one is Yom Tov, and one is Shabbos. You remember that. Why? Why were the Jews happy over this? Because Haman, Rashi says, abolished these. Why would Haman abolish them? Right? He was going to kill him anyway. So why say you can't wear tefillin or something like that? In a few months, they'll all be dead. As far as I can tell, Rashi's, and I think it's only Rashi this comes from, as far as I know. Rashi reflects a reading of Lahashmid Laharog Labeit. Think of those words. Lahashmid Laharog Labeit. As meaning the following. Haman planned to put an end to the Jews. Not necessarily by killing. Right? If many convert and assimilate into their new identities, like happened, for example, in Spain in 1492, then they're not Jews. Right? They don't identify as Jews. Regardless of biology. The whole racism of the 19th, 20th century, Hitler didn't exist. So Lahashmid means like Shemad, conversion. Lashmid Laharog. What's Laharog? That's you kill those who refuse to convert, the Frumis. And la'abei means to destroy the Jewish existence as such. In other words, between the first two, between Lahashmid and Laharog, you'll have Ibud. So Haman wasn't exactly Hitler, more like Torquemada in the Inquisition. Okay, so here I'm going to end on this point. If you're a classic darshan like the Italians I've been speaking about, Moscato, Zariafigo, Leona Modena, your job now is to do the following. Now, Purim is over, but you can work on it if you choose. It says, Lahashmid, Laharog, Labei. It says when the Jews hit back, it was Makas Cherev, Vehereg, Vavdon. So now your job now is to figure out how does Makas, because there are also three superfluous Lashonas. Makas Cherev, Vehereg, Vavdon. How does that match? Lahashmid, Laharog, Labei. I leave you with that challenge, and I wish everybody a happy Purim now, Shushan Purim, and we should all hear B'suras Tovas.